Reverend Z. It is Martin Luther King Jr. Day here in the United States, where we remember the civil rights activist and pastor, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. I have a copy of his lovely book, A Knock at Midnight. Actually, he did not. I'm sorry. This is a collection of his sermons. This was, I believe, published after his death. It is indeed his writing. It is indeed his words. But a group of people, Claiborne Carson and Peter Holleran, compiled this book, which if you are a pastor out there and you're interested in really good sermons, and this is a good little book to have. My wife picked that up for me in her travels, and that's a really good book, and I'm blessed to have a wife that understands me well enough to pick something like that. But I don't come here today unfortunately, I'm not coming here today to talk about how Dr. King's dream has been realized. Unfortunately, far from it. His dream, to a certain extent, in the last couple of years, seems further than it did. I remember when I was a kid in school, we obviously had ethnic strife, and there were bad things happening. But when we talked about it, and we watched the black and white movies of civil rights protesters being attacked with fire hoses, that all seemed very distant to us. Now, as I'm sitting here, I am watching in real time as Nazis walk through our streets, and as the next generation of bigots are being cultivated by their parents, which is one of the main reasons I started this channel. But today, I want to come to you in an issue of is this Christian, which I don't think I can't believe that I have to say this, but is abusing your elders Christian? And unfortunately, this is a question that I have to ask. Now, obviously, this is the story. If you're watching this in real time, this is the story of the young men from Coventry Catholic in Kentucky who were on the National Mall to apparently protest the people that were protesting who were broadly protesting the racist, anti-women, anti-indigenous people, all the bad stuff that Trump is doing right now. There is a large group, various groups of people protesting, and so these people these young people decided to show up and protest the protesters, which I guess these are the times that we live in. These young men, and I'll put up a picture of them if I figure out how to do that, were from Coventry Catholic, which is a Catholic school in Kentucky. We will circle back around more to that in a little bit. But I would like to start with Nathan Phillips, who is from the Omaha tribe, and he was there celebrating demonstrations and celebrating Indigenous people events around Indigenous People Day or week. I've heard it quoted both ways, and frankly, I should have looked that up, whether or not it's a week or a day. But considering the heritage and history, it should be a month at least. But anyway, Nathan, just a quick background on Mr. Nathan Phillips. Nathan Phillips is, besides being a member of the Omaha tribe, he is also a Vietnam veteran and a Marine, which I don't know how many of you know Marines, but they're usually tough dudes, and they don't particularly take punks or bullies particularly well. I recall there is this older Marine who lives in my neighborhood who fought in the Korean War, And so that gives you an idea of his age. And I was on the bus, and the guy next to me is screaming at his girlfriend and calling her various names. And I'm there in my suit, going to the hospital to visit folks. And I suggest to him that, what he's doing is not biblical, and suggest that maybe he shouldn't be saying those things to his girlfriend. And he says some choice things to me. And this gentleman, who has a cane, sitting in the handicap section while the bus was moving, got up and very shakily came back, put his hand on the shoulder of the young man, and said, "You need to listen to the Reverend, or I'm going to knock out your teeth." And that wasn't quite the message that I wanted to send to the young man, but having a gentleman wearing his Korean War hat with his 3 battle ribbons on the hat was, I don't know if that young man respected the Marine Corps more than he respected the clergy, but his tone greatly reduced and his profanity cut out after that. And we actually for the rest of that bus ride got to have a conversation about how you're supposed to treat your wife and so on and so forth. And so the Marine Corps, even though they are an organization that is by design exists to kill people and break things, it seems that they, at their very core, don't like a bully. And Mr. Phillips, I've not seen an article where it states what his rank was, which I feel a little bit bad that they have not gone a little bit more into his background. Hopefully, in the next couple of days, we'll learn a little bit more about Mr. Phillips, because he sounds like an interesting dude. Mr. Phillips describes a scene where some black Hebrew Israelites were exchanging taunts with the students from Coventry Catholic, and he says he is quoted as saying, "When I took that drum and started singing, I placed myself in between these 2 factions of people." He thought the young men were going to hurt the black Hebrew Israelites. As Phillips explains, it was a real conscious process. It was just what they call it wasn't a real conscious process. It was just what they call a spur of the moment. I'm a Marine Corps veteran, and I know that mob mentality can be like. And I know what that mob mentality can be like. That's where it was at. I got to a point where they just needed something for them to just tear them apart. I mean, it was that ugly. Now, if someone says to me, I got a teenager, I got a Marine veteran who I am told, I gotta believe that a man that was in the Vietnam War understands what the ugly side of human nature looks like. You add to that, he's a Native American who I'm sure that he has been the subject of some sort of bigotry in his life and has had an intimate, probably had several intimate encounters with how Americans can be ugly. And when this man saw this, he said, "Hey, this is not good. These guys are going to get themselves hurt." And he took what, as best I can see, is a very peaceful and very Christian position. He just stood between them. He further went on to say, now, by the way, he is reporting this to the Detroit Free Press. He is from Michigan, and I take it that's his hometown newspaper. "I heard them saying, 'Build the wall, build the wall.' These are indigenous lands. We're not supposed to have walls," he said. "I wish I could see the energy of that young mass of young men. Put that energy into making the country really, really great. Helping with those that are hungry." I don't know if Mr. Phillips is a man of faith, but frankly, if I saw a pastor injecting himself into this position or herself into this position, getting between two angry groups of people, and their only lament afterwards was, gosh, I just wish that energy was used into feeding some people or helping some people. I can't think of a more Christian attitude to have in a situation like that. Me, I mean, I saw the video and saw some people screaming, build a wall at Native Americans, and just the first thing I thought was obviously the cognitive dissonance which must exist in that group of people, where a group of white folks, which I don't know their heritage, but let's say that they had been here for a while, that would mean that their ancestors came and stole this land off the Native Americans. And so which is a bit, there's just, ugh. So that brings me to my scripture for today, which is 1 Timothy 5, verse 1. Do not rebuke an older man harshly, but exhort him as if he were your father. It continues on, which isn't relevant to this, but just I like to read the whole verse. Treat young men as brothers, older women as mothers, and young women as sisters with absolute purity. Bottom line is, it's not talking about this is what you have to do for the people that are in your church. It says anytime you come across, Timothy's not saying, you read the whole chapter. I'm not going to, just because I don't want this to be a 30-minute long video. But he's not talking about this. These are only our Christian people, or in this case, I suppose, only Catholic people. It's stating anywhere that you come across an elderly person, you need to treat them with respect as you would your father. And obviously this is respect of your father in an ideal situation. So please do not comment in the comment section that your father was a bad man and you don't have to respect him. That is an entirely different subject, which we will get to someday, unfortunately, because it sounds as if we need to, considering some of the comments we've received. But that brings me to now, first things first, it would appear that after all of this happened, and I'm not going to read the press release because you can go and read it yourself, but the leaders of the Coventry Catholic School and the Coventry Faith Community obviously sent out a press release stating that what these boys were doing was wrong. And so we will leave that there, because that is that's hopefully what they should be saying. Now, this is one of the mothers of one of the there I have. Where I'm not going to get, hopefully, I would like to believe that these young men who are, they're essentially children, because they're, 13, 14, 15. I hope that they will look at this event, and hopefully a couple months down the road, their priest will sit with them and say, hey, read them this verse, or perhaps the public outcry against them for being so short-sighted will convince them that they were wrong. And so I'm not going to, I've seen some names floating around. We're just not going to get into that. It's not relevant to this. But one of the parents came out. And she states that the student explained, we were standing there when a group of 4 African American protesters started calling us crackers and school shooters. So the kid's reporting to his mother, so we started doing school cheers because our school is very big in school spirit. We have lots of chants of cheers that we do, so we started doing them. Eventually, while we were doing that, the Native American man approached us, and was banging his drum. He walked directly into the crowd and approached one student that is all over the place right now. The boy just stood there. When I first saw it happening, I was really confused. I didn't know what was happening. I just saw the man approach a fellow student and start banging a drum in his face. Now, I've seen the video, and the two were of similar height, and the guy's drum was down here, and he was banging it down here. So I wasn't banging in anyone's face, but that's beside the point. Stress makes you remember things. And this continue. Says, I was more in the background, so I didn't see him coming up at first, but I heard the drum. The man wasn't alone. He had other Native American men with him, one of which got into the face of another student, actually. This was right in front of me. He was saying things like, go back to Europe, you took this land. That happened right in front of me. He was screaming at the student. Smith explained that after a while, the student who had the drumming in his face just walked away. Now, the mother goes on to make the point that these students were first victimized by the 4 black Muslims, as she refers to them, and then they were victimized by the leaders of their school and of their faith community who called them out for being wrong. Well, I've watched the videos of this. I don't see anywhere. There is some cell phone video of the Muslim Israelites, or there is some video of the 4 black young men exchanging screams with the white young men. That did happen. They weren't exactly on top of each other, but if I were standing there, I might have done what Mr. Phillips had done. Fortunately, Mr. Phillips had some backup with them, and a group of people managed to get between the groups. And Mr. Phillips' goal was apparently to keep the two groups from fighting with each other. And it appears that his actions, those of his compatriots, was successful. There was no fight. The Catholic kids sort of broke up and left after a while. Now, as for the school spirit, I don't recall seeing anything where they're chanting things for basketball teams or football teams. They were screaming about building a wall. Now, I don't know what immigration crisis Kentucky currently has. The last invasion that Kentucky had that I can recall was during the Civil War, and frankly, they kind of brought that on themselves. If you believe that the North started the Civil War, please comment angrily in the comments below, just to give you something else to complain about. Yes, we should take down all the statues of Robert E. Lee, too. This brings me to the school itself. I told you I was going to circle back around to the school. The school did, like I said, complain about these actions. Now, for those of you that don't know, I work as a clown. I teach one of the ministries of our group is we take inner city kids, we teach them how to be clowns. I have been blessed with a life where I have gotten to perform, make folks happy, and then during that time I went to seminary because I felt the calling from God. The history of blackface in the United States, which I'll explain why I'm taking a severe right turn right now, is a scary one. Now, I'm not going to start with the racist aspects of it, because if you do not believe that wearing blackface and pretending to be a black person in a bad stereotype is a bad thing, then frankly, I can't convince you of anything, probably. But back in the mid-1800s, there were things which were sort of a competitor to the circus called minstrel shows. And minstrel shows originally were almost exclusively black. And what would happen is you would have a group of black folks who would juggle, do skits, entertain things, sort of in a circus environment. Some of them had animals, some of them... It was not quite what we think of in the circus now, but in a time before television, radio, and all of the other various electronic distractions that we currently have, it was pretty good. One of the things that would happen in these shows were it was a bit of a release for the stress and the stereotypes and the racism of the times. People would make fun of the different groups and people would laugh. It was probably sort of a bit like, I don't know, when a popular comedian makes fun of different ethnic groups in this day and age. Now that has become more charged recently, but it was a thing, and it was, for the people that were involved in the minstrel shows, it was not the world's greatest living, but when you had a choice between digging ditches and juggling and entertaining folks, let me tell you, juggling and entertaining folks is much better than digging ditches. And so these folks made a good living at it. Unfortunately, as they made a good living at it, there were some other performers, not necessarily great performers, and I'm not going to get into the history of this because we will be here all day, but there were some white performers that said to themselves, hey, if I dress up like the black folks in those minstrel shows, I can make the same sort of money that they're making. And there was enough money at it that white folks then decided to start stealing jobs off of black people. And that was the beginning of blackface in the United States. Obviously, it has morphed over the last century or two into something very, very racist. And I could spend hours on the history of this to that. Now, you may be saying to yourself, hey, why are you talking about blackface in this deal? Well, after this all broke and people started talking about Coventry Catholic and started talking about these young people, pictures of sports events, basketball games, and various other things where people attended Coventry Catholic would put up, they had videos and pictures of this, and what they had was video of young people in blackface. Now, I went to I'm obviously a Yankee, and I went to a school in a northern city, and unfortunately the Coventry Catholic High School page is crashed at this moment, but while I was researching this earlier, it was not crashed. Their Facebook page is down now. A lot of their pages are down now, which is all very interesting. But when I first went to these pages, it was clear that the young men were not wearing school colors. I've seen people suggesting, oh, they dressed up in blackface because they were showing school pride in school colors. Well, their school mascot, as I recall, is a southern-looking gentleman who appears to be wearing a powder blue Confederate uniform. I don't know. He might be. He might be a Kentucky colonel. He has a C on his hat. I'm not exactly sure what that is. I haven't done exhaustive research into the history and heritage of Coventry Catholic. But everywhere that I see their stuff, their colors appear to be powder blue and white and are not black. And I actually saw one person liken it to Steeler fans, which dress up in blackface. Well, you'll notice that I talk about my hometown of Pittsburgh and so on and so forth. I am intimately aware of the crazy things that Steeler fans dress. And yes, there are definitely Steeler fans that paint themselves. They paint themselves black and yellow, or black and gold. I apologize to the Steeler Nation. It is black and gold. The closest I have seen someone doing blackface was half of their face is black and half of their face is yellow. I have yet to see a Steeler fan entirely dressed in blackface. Frankly, if I imagine that if someone did that, Franco Harris would come out of his skybox and really have something rude to say to them. And I would imagine that if a Steeler fan were rebuked by Franco Harris, they would stop whatever that behavior is. Because Franco's Italian army still has some sway in this region. But that said, black is not one of their colors. And there are many pictures, and I've seen one picture where there were 3 students in blackface standing behind a young black man from a different school, and I'm guessing he's a different school because he's wearing a red basketball outfit. I'm sorry, uniform. I'm sorry. I am not a big sports ball fan. I do apologize. But they're standing behind him in blackface, screaming at this young man. And it appears, as best I can tell, I could find pictures from 2 different sports and at least 3 different teams where this activity was happening. So that meant that someone at the Coventry Catholic High School saw young people either putting blackface on in their bathrooms. They certainly saw them coming into their gymnasiums and football stadiums wearing blackface. And they looked at that and they thought, yeah, that's okay. The high school that I went into, we had a smart aleck young white man who came in the day after Martin Luther King Jr. Day dressed up as Martin Luther King Jr. And the principal took him aside and explained to him that he was being inappropriate, and he was sent to the art teacher who helped him scrub the blackface off. We have now, if in my youth we understood that blackface was inappropriate, certainly Kentucky has gotten the memo by now. And that's why I am bringing this back to the school. The school, now that they have been outed as a... When people think of a bunch of kids from a school and something goes wrong with those bunch of kids, which I'm saying bunch of kids, it looked like a couple of dozen kids from the video. So that's a sizable portion of any group of students. People look at that and say, wow, what's the school doing wrong? Now, obviously, this is more anecdotal than I can prove that there is something significantly wrong with the school. But if you are running a religious institution and you're allowing your students to wear blackface to school, these students were on a school trip, allowed to wear hats supporting a racist agenda. Now, you can say, hey, the MAGA hats are not racist, but if you're wearing the MAGA hats and screaming at black people and Native Americans to build walls and that they should go home, besides I shouldn't have to say this, we stole the land from the Native Americans, and the vast majority of black folks did not come here willingly. So, if I were running a school and I saw that happening, I would feel that we had failed. I would feel as an educator that I had done wrong. And we as a greater community of Christians, we should be looking at that situation and saying to ourselves, these were our kids, and our kids thought this was okay. We should feel bad about that. And frankly, at least 2 of the parents of these kids have come out and defended the actions of their children. If I had mouthed off to a older person, my mother would smack me in the head. If I had mouthed off, I don't know what she would have done if I had mouthed off to a Native American that was a veteran. She'd probably kill me. She would have wounded me in some way. If you're a parent out there and your child is wearing a red cap and screaming about walls, unfortunately the likelihood is they're probably doing it because you're doing it. But you should be worried about that. The Ku Klux Klan doesn't wear white hoods and sheets very much anymore because it looks silly and people think that it is dumb. I fear that they are now wearing red ball caps. We as parents, we as Christian leaders, we need to be looking at these young people and we need to be saying to them that this was wrong, and we need to remind them. We need to remind them of 1 Timothy 5. Well, I thank you for tuning in. Please keep me in your prayers, and I'll be keeping you in mind.